a call to action for soldiers in the Pacific, and what to know about meeting between the leaders of North Korea and Russia. All that and more today, September 14th, 2023. Good morning, Early Birds. I'm Zimone Perez, and this is the Early Bird Brief, produced by Defense News and Military Times. First up, the top officer for Army forces in the Pacific region challenged soldiers this week with a, quote, call to action. U.S. Army Pacific Commander General Charles Flynn says that China's leaders are likely considering how to use their growing military power within the next decade. He spoke in a virtual address to attendees at the annual Maneuver Warfighter Conference at Fort Moore, Georgia. He told soldiers to look at the challenges in the Pacific and to think hard about where they'll be in the next 5 to 10 years and what they're doing today to prepare. Flynn is not alone in his concerns. CNN first reported that Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall said something similar this week at the Air Force Association annual Air, Space, and Cyber Conference. Flynn says the Army has ceded many of its capabilities in the Pacific region, but is clawing back ground with outreach and cross-training programs. That includes Operation Pacific Pathways. That's an annual program that flows soldiers from various Pacific-focused and United States-based units into the region. There, they work alongside partner and allied militaries. Up next, we have some news coming out of the Korean Peninsula. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un vowed his, quote, full and unconditional support for Russian President Vladimir Putin yesterday. The two leaders, who have been isolated by the West, held a meeting Wednesday that lasted more than 4 hours. The meeting underscores how the two countries' interests are aligning. Earlier this week, the U.S. warned that talks could lead to a deal to supply ammunition for Moscow's war in Ukraine. Analysts say North Korea may have tens of millions of artillery shells and rockets based on Soviet designs to boost the Russian army, and Kim could seek badly needed energy and food aid. Analysts also say tech related to intercontinental ballistic missiles, nuclear-capable ballistic missile submarines, and military reconnaissance satellites could be on the table. Here's why it matters. If North Korea supplies Russia with weapons, it could potentially put more pressure on the U.S. and its partners to pursue negotiations as concerns over a protracted conflict grow. Yesterday's meeting came hours after North Korea fired 2 ballistic missiles toward the sea, which extended a highly provocative run of tests. Kim pledged continued support for Moscow, making an apparent reference to the war in Ukraine. The United States has accused North Korea since last year of providing Russia with arms, including to the Russian mercenary group Wagner. Both Russian and North Korean officials denied such claims. And buying arms from North Korea or providing the country rocket technology would violate international sanctions. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller addressed that earlier this week.
I will remind both countries that any transfer of arms from North Korea to Russia would be in violation of multiple United Nations Security Council resolutions. And we, of course, have aggressively enforced our sanctions against entities that fund Russia's war effort, and we will continue to enforce those sanctions and will not hesitate to impose new sanctions if appropriate.
Russia and China have blocked U.S. efforts at the UN Security Council to strengthen sanctions on North Korea over its intensifying missile tests. At the same time, both accused Washington of worsening tensions with Pyongyang by expanding military exercises with South Korea and Japan. North Korea is the only nation, besides Russia and Syria, to recognize the independence of 2 Russian-backed separatist regions in eastern Ukraine. It has also hinted at an interest in sending construction workers to those areas to help with rebuilding efforts. In other news, officials confirmed 3 Naval Special Warfare Command officers are facing admirals' mass disciplinary hearings in connection to the death of a SEAL trainee last year. For more on this, senior Navy Times reporter Jeff Zazulowicz joins the episode today. So, Jeff, what can you tell us about the connection between what these officers are now dealing with and the death of the SEAL candidate last year?
So in February 2022, a SEAL candidate by the name of Kyle Mullen had just completed Hell Week at the SEAL Basic Training program in Coronado, California, which is just off of San Diego. Hell Week is a really hellacious process, for lack of a better term. SEAL students or candidates are really pushed to their mental and physical limits, very little sleep, insane physical demands and stuff like that. Kyle Mullen completed this training but died shortly thereafter of acute pneumonia. An investigation into his death found he was coughing up pink fluid And a broader Navy investigation into the whole training process found a real lack of oversight, things of that nature, some real systemic shortfalls. Fast forward to this week, we learned that 3 officers who were kind of leading the training program at the time are now facing admiral's mass disciplinary hearings. This is a level less than a court-martial trial. It's basically an administrative disciplinary proceeding, but it just indicates that the Navy feels there might be some more accountability that needs to be meted out in connection to the death of Mullen. The 3 officers facing non-judicial punishment or admiral's mast are Captain Brian Dreschler, Captain Bradley Gary, and Commander Eric Ramey. Dreschler was the Naval Special Warfare Center's commanding officer at the time of Mullen's death. Gary led the center's basic training command, and Ramey was the center's head medical official at the time. We have not been able to confirm through Navy officials what charges they'll be facing, but I've been told by an official or a person with knowledge of the situation that they'll be facing negligent dereliction of duty charges in connection to Mullen's death.
And what else can you share broadly about the medical oversight and care that SEAL trainees receive? Also, what's involved with the tests SEAL candidates endure?
It's a balance, because you'll hear defenders of the program say Navy SEALs are arguably, some of the most elite warriors in the world these days. And to make SEALs, you have to put them through hell, both physical and mental. There's apparently Mullen, before he died, had told his mother, according to other media reports, that he would not quit no matter what. And when you quit SEAL training, you have to go ring a bell 3 times, and it's kind of a shameful thing. And it's an acknowledgement that perhaps you are not up to these insanely high standards that the nation demands of the SEAL force. And again, arguably, they should be demanded of such elite warriors, but it's just a matter of how can we also protect these young people as they go through this and make sure that, more people like Mullen don't pay the ultimate price for wanting to serve their country. A Naval Education and Training Command investigation into Mullen's SEAL training class that was released this past spring found that the training program was plagued by widespread failures in medical care, poor oversight, and even the use of performance-enhancing drugs among some SEAL candidates. That report also found that medical oversight and care were, quote, poorly organized, poorly integrated, and poorly led, and put candidates like Mullen at significant risk. SEAL training is so demanding, and SEAL trainees demand so much of themselves because they want to get that SEAL trident. But these investigations just raise questions about how the Navy and the SEAL community can maybe help protect these SEAL students from themselves, so to speak, and just ensure that tragedies like Kyle Mullen don't repeat themselves.
Thanks, Jeff. If you enjoyed our conversation today, please like and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. Also on your radar for today, Military Times broke the news that the Justice Department granted asylum to a former Afghan intelligence officer nearly a year after he was detained at the border between the U.S. and Mexico. For more on this, military veterans and journalism fellow Allison Erickson joins the episode today. Hey Allison, so can you give us a quick recap of Abdul Wasi Safi's story? Why is he seeking asylum in the U.S., and how did he end up in custody at the southern U.S. border?
Sure. So his full name is Abdul Wasi Safi. He goes by Wasi to family and friends, and that's how I choose to write about him through the rest of the stories. Wasi is an interesting case because last year, when I came across the Safi brothers, first I was in contact with Sami, his older brother, who was advocating for Wasi, who was caught in a detention center at the time in Valverde, border between the U.S. and Mexico at Texas. What was interesting was Sami said that Wasi was trying to declare asylum, but he was instead being held in a detention center. And so that was conflicting information right from the get-go. People have a right to declare asylum, but there are some nuances happening at that border that made that process more difficult. And further complicating that process, Wasi was a former Afghan intelligence officer. He did things like provide the U.S. forces with information that in many cases saved their lives. If you can imagine, for example, the troops on the ground there from the ANSF providing information that would save prevent some of our soldiers, some of our units from being ambushed. So that's the kind of work Ghazi was doing in Afghanistan, and it was known that he did that kind of work. He, on several occasions, they detained members of the Taliban, for example. When the Taliban took over after the U.S. withdrew in August 2021, there was a vacuum of power, and a lot of Afghan military, special forces, those who worked closely with the U.S., interpreters, they were on the Taliban's chopping block, if you will. There were threats made, and then there were hundreds, if not by now thousands, of people killed publicly by the Taliban in retaliation for their support to the United States. So that brings us now to a rather harrowing story. Ghazi went across continents to make it to the border so that he could live with his brother in Houston. And through many ups and downs, finally, September 11th, technically, the judge signed an order granting Ghazi asylum to live here in the United States with his brother in Houston. Ghazi didn't hear about this until Tuesday, September 12th. Ghazi got the good news and was in complete disbelief. So he's feeling pretty good right now. He feels positive about his future, and the brothers feel extreme gratitude and like things are looking up for them finally after this long process.
Thanks, Allison. And now here's some other stories that we're hearing chirps about. The U.S. could have the first Ukrainian pilots trained on F-16 fighter jets before the end of the year. The director of the U.S. Air National Guard confirmed the news this week, but he said it will be longer than that before they are flying combat missions. Iran this week identified the 5 prisoners it hopes to see freed in the United States in exchange for 5 Iranian Americans now held in Tehran and billions in assets once held by South Korea. The U.S. Air Force wants to stand up bases where MQ-9 Reapers land no matter the weather and refuel closer to the front line. The process relies on an equipment package that includes a portable aircraft control station. And search teams in Libya combed streets, buildings, and even the sea for bodies in a coastal city where authorities said massive flooding killed at least 5,100 people. The death toll is expected to rise further. And on this day in history, in 1814, Francis Scott Key penned a poem that was later set to the music and became America's national anthem. Key was inspired to write the Star-Spangled Banner after he saw a U.S. flag still flying over Fort McHenry at the Battle of Baltimore. That's it for us this morning. To get more top stories and breaking news, go to defensenews.com/EBB to subscribe to the Early Bird Brief newsletter. Please give us a like, rating, and a comment wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow us on social media at @defense_news and @Military Times. The Early Bird Brief is hosted and produced by me, Zimone Z. Perez. Today's episode featured stories by Todd South, The Associated Press, Jeff Zazulowicz, and Allison Erickson. Our podcast editor is Jessica Edwards, and our editor-in-chief is Mike Bruce. Have a great day.